Not everyone has equal abilities, but everyone should have equal opportunity for education. And with that, I would like to welcome to this episode of The Switch our guest, Ray Batra. Ray, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for having me. Do appreciate it.
So before we jump into a lot of the stuff that I want to talk about with Shift Up, can we just get a little bit of your story? So the way that I like to ask this is, if you could tell us a little bit about where you come from, things like that. But if you could divide your life into epochs, where I was before, where I am now, what are those points, and how did you make that journey?
Sure. So if I were to break it into sort of three parts. So I think first part, just as a little bit of background for everybody. I grew up in the U.S. In Michigan. Ann Arbor specifically, so university town. My parents, my dad was actually a professor at the university. My mom also did, a number of work. She actually spent a lot of time previously earning her PhD in adult distance learning, actually, back in, I want to say the 80s, I think, out of Columbia. And so my upbringing, right, was in many ways very blessed, right? Very privileged in some capacity. I think I did go to the public schools in Ann Arbor, which were a pretty awesome mix of folks. I mean, we had a huge range of diversity on many levels, which was a great environment to grow up in. I also religiously grew up Unitarian Universalist. So this was, my dad is from India. He was raised Hindu, and my mom grew up in the Detroit area, Catholic, and so they sort of, when they met, they wanted to raise us in a different environment to explore various religious opportunities and paths ourselves. So both from a racial perspective, from and a number of other perspectives, got a lot of opportunity to really diversity in many different categories when I was growing up. Until I was about 14 or so, was mostly, I was a curious kid. I was compassionate, I am. And, but politically and sort of philosophically followed in many ways my family. So started more liberal, didn't really think a whole lot, I think, for myself. But that changed, right? I think that changed when I was, I think it was 14, sophomore year of high school. And really around that time, I had a first existential crisis from a conversation with a mentor that lasted about 4 hours and nearly drove me bananas. And I remember waking up from that conversation after the next day and thinking, like, what the hell was true, right? Like, what is going on in the world? I don't know what to believe. And so everything was shattered at that point. And I essentially spent, I want to say almost, I guess, 7-ish years, right, on a path going into college, really compelled to figure things out for myself. And so that pushed me to a point of, at one point I was certainly philosophically depressed, suicidal in different capacities when I was about a freshman in college, and really thinking about questions of morality and truth, really around those two concepts. And I guess, in my mind, I had come to a conclusion at that time that that purpose, I said truth, morality, and purpose. That purpose was something that could never be achieved. That there was always more to do and to accomplish. And for me, it was an external concept. It was something that revolved around the idea of maximizing social impact. And that, so I'd say the second point in time, which was sort of after, let's say after I sort of made that conclusion around 18, 19, I sort of turned my jet engines on, like as a person, as somebody who executes and get things done. And I pushed all the philosophical questions to the side. I didn't want to deal with them. I was like, okay, came out of this really, really deep, dark hole. And I was saying, okay, I don't actually know the answer to this. I don't know the answer to this. I don't know what's at the very bottom of morality and what is truth. But someone had told me, you may figure it out later. And something in that phrase sort of shook me a little bit. And I said, okay, that's true. I have a long life to live. I can probably figure this out later. And so anyway, that's when I turned on, again, these jet engines. And when I say jet engines, I mean, I was, from the moment of waking up to the moment of sleeping, 11 at night, 12 at night, 1 in the morning, working on social impact projects. So I was in college, I was leading organizations, I was doing all these crazy things. And to an insane amount, to a point where the relationships that I had with other people, with romantic partners, with friends, became really fucked up, to be honest. Where I felt like when I was spending time with them, and I felt like I didn't have the what's the word, I wasn't allowed to spend time with them just to spend time with them, right? Just to be sort of in a human relationship. And so anyway, that became a problem. I ended up burning out. I destroyed some relationships. It was not good. Until my junior year of college, I went to, I hit this burnout point. I hit a point not good at all, and it shook me. And I came out of that, and some of my best friends pushed me and said, hey, now's your time to take all that energy that you're using to create things, right? To put in your professional life and literally turn that inward, because you got some work to do, right? And so I took a step out of that completely. And I spent, in my mind mentally was saying, okay, 6 months, a year, whatever it needs to take, I need to figure this out because something's wrong. And I spent, I signed up for more humanities classes. I saw you all had interviewed Anne Curzan. I didn't have her as a professor, but I knew of her. I respect her. I've seen her TED Talk. I think I've seen her in the hallway. But I did sign up for a class at U of M taught by another JR. I saw that you also interviewed somebody named JR. John Rubidow, for those of you who maybe know him at Michigan, I don't know. But he taught an art of the essay course. And so I went back into some English classes. I went back into the humanities. I went back into, most importantly, I enrolled in a program called the New England Literature Program, the NELP program at Michigan, which is literally a semester, in this case, the summer semester, where 40 undergraduates go into the woods in New Hampshire without any technology. You're not allowed any technology except for a pencil and a dictionary, and take English classes and cook together. And that was 6 weeks. And as you can imagine, that's an incredible opportunity to reflect, right? To think deeply, to have conversations, to dig in. And it was absolutely that, right? For me, it absolutely transformed my mind, right? So that was a switch for me. I came out of that, the switch specifically, in my mind was, and it's been honestly years since I've dug into this really deeply, so some of this is not coming as fluently as it would back then. But I think for me, prior to that point, I had prioritized rationality above all else, right? I had sort of told myself that emotions ought to not play a role, or that they're somehow subservient. I don't know what the right word is, to logic and rationality. And because I felt we could be tricked by our emotions, which certainly is true, but we can also be tricked in other ways. And I realized how false that was for me in terms of when I think about first principles. I think about, what is it that I want to build, our life around. And I, to me, part of this was realizing that starting with the idea that rationality is somehow where we need to begin, and maybe I'm using these words slightly incorrectly here, logic, rationality, but it's like circular logic, because in order to get to that point, right, you have to use it itself. And there is quite literally no actual inherent reason why emotion cannot that experience, the human experience, is not just your head, but also your heart, right? In many ways. So really, I came out of that experience of NELP with like another half to my entire experience that I had never previously valued, which was a tremendous shakeup for me. And there's a much larger, longer part to this too, right? That's just sort of one angle to the whole thing. But when I came out of that, I think that was the beginning, actually, of what I'm doing now. And for I'm going to quickly give an overview of what I'm doing right now, because I think that'll give some context. So right now, I am the founder of a company called ShiftUp, and ShiftUp is has created a new category that we call learning gyms. And a learning gym is a physical space and community designed for online students. The reason for this is that online learning is lonely, right? It's as simple as that in many cases. Learning online is lonely. And that's not the case literally for every single person, but for the vast majority of people, I believe it is. We'll talk more about that. But as you can tell, right, for me, after college, so I came back from NELP, I had one more year of school, and then I left college. And I went from there to Silicon Valley. And I felt free in many ways. Because before that, I felt in my mind that I was almost trapped. Like I felt like I had to maximize social impact. And so I actually believed I needed to stay in Detroit. I believed I needed to work for the government and basically be a public servant in a particularly without real freedom to choose otherwise. And so I chose to go Silicon Valley. I had some friends there. I had an amazing opportunity. I worked for an education technology company. And then after that company, about a year, I left and I came back to Detroit. What I had seen was the failures decade after decade of entrepreneurs and investors, and many of them who are in many ways highly rational people, right? Look at technology and the potential for technology in education and say, oh, we now, like if you think about education technology, it started out with correspondence courses, right? By mail. People would literally mail these courses to adults because they couldn't come to a college. And then, from there you'd have, television courses. After television, you'd have each new technology that came along, right? The internet, and then 2.0, et cetera. And all these different times, people believed that traditional schooling would be disrupted. It would be quote unquote disrupted because of this technology. And the reality, again, is that school as a product or service, right, that people use is not about the content, usually, right? Content is only a small slice of it. And so no matter how efficient and technologically advanced you can make the content delivery, the reality is for most people, it's a very emotional experience because the social aspects, but more deeply, more beyond just the social aspect, right? It's about the relationships with your instructor, the relationships with your peers. And relationships are, I'm not going to say impossible to do virtually, but it's much more difficult. And also education, I think, when done properly, and when you really think about the bigger term education, is a lot about transformation. It's a lot about human identity. And in many ways, that's a human process that benefits deeply from human relationships. So that's all fairly abstract. I mean, I think, so if I kind of, there's like the part 1, which is like me through 14, sort of part 2 is like 14 through 18-ish, during that like really intense philosophical type phase where I was, was almost suicidal. I was suicidal. And then I'd say 18 through, whatever it was, 20, 21, when I went to NELP, and then post NELP. So really there's sort of like those 4 stages if I were to break it up in that capacity. And then professional context, for those who don't know, I mean, I've been very deeply interested in education since I was 16. So I was also blessed I was a part of a scout troop, a Boy Scout troop that in Ann Arbor, we have sometimes incredible mentors. I had an incredible mentor who happened to be, a leadership and science education PhD, right? Taught graduate students. He was one of our scout instructors. And so we had an incredible leadership development training as high schoolers. And anyway, he got me into these conversations about education since I was 16, and I got into activism and reform. And then in college, I started advocating for, I actually created a couple mini courses at the University of Michigan, and then advocated for the university to create a new college campus in Detroit, which did a whole proposal on this, like a future kind of campus of the future type of thing. They didn't do it then, but actually fast forward just last fall, the university announced they are in fact launching a mini campus in Detroit that's meant to be of the future. So hopefully there was a seed planted in there with some of the executives I pitched. And then I actually did a little bit of substitute teaching in Detroit and San Francisco. I did some online learning work as an intern for the University of Michigan. I did some policy work as an intern with the U.S. Secretary of Education. So it's definitely a thread. I definitely care a lot about. I'd say what I care about most, and this comes directly from Nell, is what I believe life is about, for at least for me, which is helping people figure out who it is they want to be as people, as human beings, and helping them experience the freedom to realize it, right? To become it. And I try to do that with myself, and I try to do that with everybody at Shift Up. And that's what it's about.
Awesome. That's a great way to bring us in through your whole story and to shift up. And I want to get into a lot of the education stuff, but I think it's really important to talk about the philosophical principles. You mentioned at the beginning, sort of the beginning stages of you as a political and philosophical being, just following in sort of your parents' footsteps. And, I'm also from Ann Arbor. I understand that for most people in Ann Arbor, that means, politically liberal, philosophically, sort of, yeah, politically left. And then you mentioned a departure from that. Did you find in the departure from that your inclination was to sort of pendulum swing to the extreme the other way? I mean, that's something that happened in my experience, because I don't mirror that exactly,
Yeah.
but that was something that I experienced in departing from the structures philosophically that were given to me. Like, I fully experienced that inclination to go to the other side. And I think it was only solid foundations in rational thinking that I feel have pulled me to a more balanced approach. Does any of that resonate you? And is that what your experience was? Or
I mean, it does, certainly. I feel like I've pendulumed around several times, right? I think it's kind of my experience, and most people's experiences are sort of like an onion, right? You got to peel back different layers. There's sort of, or trees, maybe the tree rings
sure,
at different times. Yeah, I mean, I think I believe for myself that I've pretty consistently been, I think, fairly independent in terms of the sense that any singular political philosophy or party has not quite dictated my own personal opinions, many of them which I keep silent. I mean, I think, or I keep to myself. I mean, I do think that in my head I have sort of a more consistent stream, but yeah, I certainly swung hard in the other direction in some cases, and sort of ended up with a mix of opinions, some that fell more right, some that fell more left on specific issues.
So the other thing that stood out to me was you mentioned that, you felt almost in crisis existentially when you realized that you didn't have the answers to a lot of ground level moral, ethical questions that you had. And I think that's another very common experience. And we've actually had another guest talk about that experience specifically. I don't know if you're familiar with Noah Rashetta. He runs the Secular Buddhism podcast. So he, just to give some context, he grew up Mormon, I think, and even married Mormon, and at some point had this crisis where he was like, look, the answers that these people are giving on these foundational questions of morality. I just don't think that's true. And he went on this whole adventure trying to answer these questions. And for him, the place that he landed was in a whole bunch of the teachings in a sort of secular take on Buddhist philosophy, was that the answers are not the important part. Asking the questions are the important part, and how you ask and what you do in light of asking, like, those are so much more important than the actual grounded answers. How do you philosophically approach some of those questions now, especially now integrating the heart, as you said, integrating the emotions and integrating any of the other philosophical experiences that you've had? What's your approach to those questions now?
Yeah. What's my approach to those questions? I think, well, one book that was influential to me was Letters to a Young Poet. I don't know if any of you have read that book. It's about 100 pages. It's 10 letters. I think it's Maria Rilke, I want to say is the name. I don't remember. But that was an incredible book, and sort of my Bible, I guess, at that time. That sort of basically said the same thing, right? Really about asking and leaning into, as opposed to feeling the need to know, the need to have the answers. I mean, at this point in time, I'd say the principle, the first principle, at least for me, is, I guess you could say, kind of essentialist, I suppose. Just that I am human. I mean, I think it doesn't matter what that word is, if it's human or if it's another language or if it's something completely different. But starting from that, I'm sort of defining from there. I define. I mean, let me back up. The question in my mind that I was wrestling with for a while was, what should we be doing, right? Like, what's purpose? Or what is our purpose? What is my purpose? Is there one? And for that, I was struggling with, what's my axiom? Like, what's the thing that I'm starting with that is non-religious, let's say, at the beginning. So yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's sort of an observation, starting with an observation that I am human, in the same way that a chair is a chair, or a barnacle is a barnacle, right? Whatever it is. And is a barnacle trying to save the world? No. Right? It's trying to do its little thing. And so in the same way that I'm human, I think for me, I sort of define purposes as being human, which is sort of another conjugation of that verb, right? The same verb. And not to say that that is everything, that everybody has to be exactly the same in terms of how they define that. And to me, I define what is good and what is bad essentially as, if the action increases our ability to be human, then that is good. And if the action decreases our ability to be, and when I say to be human, that means to allow us to have the freedom to do what we want to do. So this is nothing new. I mean, I know other people and other philosophers have sort of similar ideas. I honestly don't have a rigorous background in formal philosophy almost at all. I mean, I dug into that stuff. I dug into that world deeply when I was 14, 15, whatever, around that time. And I haven't really done so since. So I was not familiar with existentialism. I was not familiar with some of those other things. But it makes sense to me. And I think it allowed me a framework by which I am choosing whether I want to abide by that, and whether I want, whether I feel like I need to act for others, or to stop others from doing terrible things. On the flip side, something else is I do believe in God. I believe what I mean by that is, what I mean by that is there is, it seems incredibly improbable to me that there are not other sort of dimensions of understanding, dimensions of comprehension or knowledge, right? So this is another thing. When I was a senior in high school, we were in a physics class, and we saw a short film called Flat World. I don't know if anybody of you have ever heard of Flat World. I think it was in the 90s or something, maybe 80s. But basically, the film was about 20 minutes or something like that. It was very short. But it essentially was the story of it was the story of a world that was completely flat, right, two-dimensional, and there were little lines and squares and whatever different shapes on this world, and they went about their day and they did their business, and then one day there was a 3D object, a sphere, right, that intersected on this plane of the two-dimensional object, the two-dimensional world. And if, then it's like, whoa, it hits you, right? Like, at least it hit me, which was, what do those two-dimensional shapes see, right? They can't comprehend what that sphere is. They only see the circles, right? Because that's the cross-section of the sphere. And so they'll never understand that entirely different dimension. And to me, that's a perfect analogy, right? There's to believe that we, as human beings, adult human beings, by the way, not just human beings, adult human beings, right? Because think about this, also kids don't have the same dimension of comprehension or knowledge, right, that adults do, right? They see things differently. Animals don't have the same as a human, or rocks don't have the same as us, right, in different capacities. And so why would I believe that there's no reason to believe that we're the top of it. Mm. And so to me, it's like a 99.9999% chance that there are other dimensions of knowledge or comprehension. And more than that, I see evidence that that's true, right? So I see evidence that that's true because I believe we see second order effects, right, of those kind of intersecting in our plane, so to speak. And some of those are things like mathematics, right? Sort of dividing by zero, things like infinity concepts, right? That we can sort of see the effects of it, but we actually can't wrap our minds around it. It's just literally not possible. Ideas like the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang. I actually took an entire astrophysics course in college specifically to try to understand the beginning of the universe. Like, that was the one thing I was curious about. And so I spent all this time in the office hours with this professor. And basically my takeaway from that course was astrophysicists can dig into like the -1 to the -32nd of what happened, right? But like the very beginning, nobody ever knows. And I think there's a difference between concepts that are incomprehensible versus ones that we can comprehend but that we don't know yet. Now, the counter argument to this is, you could say throughout history there have been things that we thought were not comprehensible that we eventually comprehended. And perhaps that's true, but I think that there are some that are real and there are some that are not in terms of that. So anyway, so those are a couple examples of reasons why I believe that. And I also believe that ties into what I mentioned earlier around sort of being human. I think a lot about, yeah, I mean, we can dig in more, but
that's good. So I love this stuff. I really love to understand some of the philosophical foundations that people are operating on and how that informs their approach. And so, I really want to get into your ideas on education and specifically why you started Shift Up and what the principles are behind that. So maybe you could give us the beginning of Shift Up and, what principles are behind it? How did you launch this?
Yeah, you're gonna hear a lot of commonalities. So Shift Up actually began as a nonprofit that was designed to be a gap year program for low-income students. So this was actually the first part of my two things that I care about, right? One is sort of helping people figure out who they want to be as individuals. Mm-hmm. That was what we started on. This was I quit my job in San Francisco from, I don't know, it was like maybe October, November 2016. I moved back to Detroit around December. I injured my leg, I tore my ACL, and then I came back one day hobbling on my crutches, and I was like, I'm gonna start a nonprofit because I knew what I wanted to do. And I was in this cold apartment in Detroit. And I basically was trying to figure out what problems can I help with in the workforce system, right? Like because that was my area of expertise, was sort of job training, higher education, innovation. And the thing I always heard was I had read lots of reports. I talked to lots of people on the ground. I talked to lots of executives. I talked to families, all these things, was that when it comes to getting people jobs, people who I wanted to serve were those who I believed were basically shut out of the system in many ways, right? People who had been trapped. And the thing that I heard was it's almost never the technical skills that are the challenge to teach. It's almost always the non-technical skills, right? Especially for folks who are more typically coming from first-gen backgrounds, low-income backgrounds, things like this. And I mentioned I'd been a part of a scout troop, which is essentially a leadership development program, right? So I had essentially 7 years of leadership development training with a graduate instructor as our coach, basically. So I had this unique way, or I had this perspective, which was like, could we build essentially like a condensed scout troop experience and sort of prepare people for technical training? So essentially like a pre-boot camp where that was focused on soft skills and leadership development. Anyway, long story short, I was going to use that type of training. That evolved. So I was doing that for 4 months. That evolved. And then I decided let's focus on kind of 18 through 24-year-olds, 16 through 24-year-olds. I cared about them a lot. A third of them, by the way, a third of 18 through 24-year-olds or 16 through 24-year-olds in Detroit are not in school and not working. Okay, so they're sort of out. They're called opportunity youth, or there's another word I'm forgetting. Anyway, and that number is the same across the country in both big cities and often rural areas, right? At 30 to 40%. So that was a big problem. I went on the street and talked to people, and I said, okay, like, why are you not in school? Why are you not working? Like, let's dig into this. And I talked to maybe 40, 50 people. And the one thing that struck me, which was there were certainly people who talked about, I don't have money, or I don't have, well, you think it'll get a job, but that I don't have transportation, or I have kids to take care of, or family, or something else. But that was actually a minority, right? Like maybe 50% or more. When it got down to it, they told me that they felt almost hopeless. They felt like they didn't know why. They didn't know what they were doing or why they should be doing anything. And that's not limited, right, to low-income students, right? This is the same problem with rich kids, right? This is the same problem with lots of people. I mean, there's a huge crisis in many ways. So what I thought was, okay, if you were working with students who could afford it, what would they do? They would probably go take a gap year. They probably go travel the world or do something else to kind of figure themselves out, so to speak. And but you can't do that with this demographic. So for me, I actually started by saying, could we combine a gap year experience with an apprenticeship and actually teach students these kids skills that they could use to earn money to basically pay for the program. And then I had to say, well, you have to start somewhere. The whole idea about the lean startup is you need to sort of, for those of you who don't know anything really about sort of startups 101 and entrepreneurship, is start small, start quick, do fast iteration, and see if you can get something started. So nobody really wanted to be my technical co-founder because I didn't really have an idea. I didn't know what I was doing. So I said, let's run a summer camp, like a week-long, 2-week summer camp. And I didn't have anybody who was going to teach these kids how to code because nobody wanted to do that with me. And so I didn't know how to code, by the way. I don't know how to code. I studied public policy in school. But I actually, this is where the principle came in, which is one of the principles of Shift Up is don't reinvent the wheel. Like there's so much online content available that is getting better and better every day. That content is becoming a commodity. So training programs, the vast majority of them should not be creating content. You should be curating content. And so that's what we did. We curated content for these 8 students, 16, 17, 18. And I literally had them come to a classroom and teach themselves how to code. I didn't know how to code. And we had coaches who were available periodically on a screen who could help them. And these kids who often have serious attendance challenges, don't come to school often, do this kind of thing. They showed up every single day, the entire time, built multiple projects, had a fantastic time, and unanimously asked me to run it again the next month. So I did. We had some pretty strong results again. And I'll fast forward, I know it's taking a long time, but basically I ended up fast forwarding, and then I realized end of summer, I took a little bit of time to myself, a few weeks, traveled a little bit, and came back and said, okay, this is cool. We have something here, but this could actually be a lot bigger. This could be like a modern community college system, right? We figured out something. And And I also realized that there were a lot of challenges that there were working for myself with students from these backgrounds, that it wasn't impossible for me to surmount, but it would be very difficult, right, for me to connect on exactly the same level. I think that the mentorship component could be better used by others who are closer with them. So anyway, I ended up pivoting it. We ended up starting to serve adults in the fall, ran a bunch of workshops, and we basically gathered enough people who started to pay by January of 2018. And I started launching our first adult training program in January 2018 with about 12 people. They paid me $250 a month, roughly, 150, 250 a month. And they started teaching themselves to code. They worked at a co-working space, same sort of deal. We had our first people start to get jobs after 5 months, part-time, about 15, 20 hours a week. This was our first one. It was incredible. I mean, this was a gentleman, his name, I don't know if I can say his name, but basically, he had dropped out of Eastern Michigan after a few years, never finished his degree, ended up as a bagger. He was a bagger at Bush's and or retailer, and he worked his ass off, and he got a job in 5 months part-time and doubled his income, and is still with us today, and just got a promotion and other things, right? So this stuff is real. It can help. It can change people's lives, and he's just one, right? One of many. So that was incredible. Basically 4 months in, I ran out of cash. Like, I didn't have much savings at all. Was burned through all that, burned through 15K in credit card debt, and was literally like struggling for $100 here, $500 there, like kind of scrounging for donations. So it was still a nonprofit at that time. And that kind of killed me. I was still working part-time, working another job. And it was like kind of claw for little bits of money here and there up until October. I mean, we shut down, we nearly shut down a few times. And then October had somebody finally give me a combination of we turned for-profit. So we converted from a nonprofit to a for-profit. We can talk about that if you want. Somebody gave me a small investment. So I quit my job. And turns out that investment didn't come through like fully. That person, I don't want to get into that, but it was not a good situation. And started to get on a track where I wanted to go raise a real amount of money, not just like $5,000, but like, let's go raise $500,000. And that took forever. I think I had no idea how hard that was going to be. We had like 6, 7 months of that, 8 months of that. Also almost shut down again. And anyway, I probably rejected about 200 times from investors, more. And then we launched officially in October. so last October, we launched a first place downtown Detroit. We now no longer just do web development. We also do digital marketing. We do user experience design, Unity game development. We now have just shy of 50 members, active paying members right now. And what a learning gym really is we're providing people with curated resources and projects into stuff we call roadmaps, learning roadmaps. So you have a structure to follow. You have coaches, right? So you have live coaches at least one night a week in different areas. You have your own personal trainer, somebody there to keep you accountable and on track every week. You have community, right? Community of peers there to keep you, motivated and going forward. You have, in normal times, you have a physical study space, right, to come in and engage. You have live events, usually 2 live events a week, social, educational, networking events. You can purchase assessments and feedback. And finally, if you pass those assessments and feedback, you can get connected to employers. So these are sort of all these different pieces that we're rebundling at essentially, a fraction of the cost of traditional in-person education, and hopefully an exponentially better experience than purely online by yourself, banging your head against the wall.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have answered this question many times because you preempted it. My next question was going to be, what's the difference between pure online and going to a learning gym? Like, why, if you have a computer at home, has access to the internet, why bother? And you just laid it out. Like, go ahead.
Well, yes and no, right? Because COVID has been a very interesting thing for us. Mm-hmm. You can imagine, right? So come March 13th, everything shut down in Michigan. We moved online, thinking. So actually, my brother, by the way, is an epidemiologist. He's actually he worked for the World Health Organization, so it was like very interesting getting all that stuff in. But there was a big question mark as to whether our business would survive. Especially because we were also scrapped for funds again. But We did, and actually, believe it or not, we have, I think, maybe 7 or 8, depending on how you slice it, different value propositions that we're bundling together. And out of those 7 or 8, arguably 5 or 6 of them you can translate online effectively, right? So the coaching, the roadmaps, the employer connections, the assessments, the the community to an extent, et cetera. So there's different pieces, and we did it, right? So we did translate it online, and really have a lot of success. So we've actually been growing at like 20 to 30% a month the last 3-4 months. Revenue's way up. Like, we've been serving people all over the country, all over the world. So it's very interesting. I think I might be wrong with my original thesis. Though I don't think so, right? I think there's a macro problem and a micro problem. I think the micro problem is specific within online learning retention. I think you can solve the online learning retention problem, which is relatively small, although it's still a massive, massive problem in many different ways. I think the macro problem is a totally different angle, which is loneliness in society, right? I think isolation and loneliness, depending on how you measure it, is also at arguably crisis levels. I think that's due to many reasons. I think there's a weakening of relationships and sort of social fabric in society. I think part of that's due, arguably the role of the decline of the importance in some cases of religion to many people. I think in many cases, the closure of retail and sort of malls and sort of third spaces in our lives where we interact and kind of make things. So at its best, a learning gym, a physical learning gym, becomes a third space in people's lives. And so a third space, for those of you who don't know, is the basic idea is your first space and your second space are like the home environment and your work environment, right? Third space is something outside of that. That's primarily a sort of a social type of environment. And we now have people who have stuck on literally years beyond their initial goal of getting a job or doing whatever, and continue to pay us $150 a month, right, month over month, in large part, I believe, and I know for some of them, because of the community that we built, right? And that's going to be difficult to replicate, but there's something very intrinsically tied, I would argue, between helping people feel alive, helping them feel respected, helping them feel fully human, and education. And so when education is done right, you're growing one's ability to be themselves, right? So sorry, that's kind of a tangent, but.
No, I think that's totally relevant because, I mean, that's the principle that is driving this whole thing. That's the principle that informs your view of how to educate, how to run an educational institution. And I think you're right that on one level, the macro problem is not addressing the actual needs of a human being and what it takes to be a self-actualized human being. We're so focused on the technical skills in a lot of ways and in a lot of settings that a lot of that gets atrophied. I mean, listening to your story, and you specifically use the word burnout as well, I think that is such a common feeling. And I think part of that is because we're not focusing on those things. Do you find that, so the people that take part in your program, do you call them students? Or do you have some other term?
Members, it's a community. So
okay,
members.
Actually, like that's
gym.
great.
Yeah.
Do you find that your members experience professional burnout in that same way? And maybe it hasn't been long enough or enough people, but do you find that they're out in the world, I guess, vulnerable to that burnout in the same way? Or do you think that the resources that you're providing and the context you're providing them is actually helping stave that off as well?
I think my particular experience of burnout was the cause was probably unique in some respects. I mean, I think just in the sense that, like, I took a lot of things to the extreme, as you could probably tell from my story, like just from all these things, in the sense that, my sense of purpose, or like what I felt I had to be doing or I should be doing, was external. And I think for many, many, many people, they also feel that something external. Usually that external bit, I would argue, is money or power or fame or something else, right? That you're sort of striving for. In my case, it was social impact, right? Like I had to maximize social impact, and that was always something that to me, could never be achieved. And there was always more to do. And so because of that, anytime I anytime I was not actively doing that, or optimizing, as Silicon Valley loves to use that term, optimizing for that, I felt like I was neglecting a duty in some ways to do that. So in some respects, again, it was different in the sense of like the extreme to which I took it, and that it was focused on social impact. But in many ways, it was similar. I would argue that a lot of people, again, prioritize money or power or fame, accumulation, optimization, and by doing that, they sacrifice relationships with others and being just the ability to feel like satisfied on a daily level with their own lives, right? I don't think that's the case with most of the people we're serving, right? I think most of the people we're serving many of them don't really have the privilege to even think about that, to be honest, right? Yeah. Like I think I'm going out on a limb here a little bit, but I would argue, I think for a lot of folks, like we're serving a lot of folks who are retail or service, right? Trying to kind of get out of that, or unemployed, but in many cases underemployed, right? We're not really focused on corporate sort of professionals like moving up like that, right? That's just not who I'm interested really in serving and who we're going to build this for. And so, but on the flip side, I'd say many people come to us and their jobs are drudgery, right? They're a janitor at a WeWork. They're doing something else that they feel like they're not seen, they're not heard, their skills are not being utilized, and they don't. And we're giving them an out for that, right? A way to actually learn a skill that can help them feel that. I think everybody wants to be seen. I think everybody wants to be heard. Everybody wants to be respected. And in some ways, I would also argue our brand and sort of the company that we're building is going against the grain in some capacity from like typical SaaS companies, software companies, or other sorts of things, where many typical scalable software companies, they do the opposite of helping you feel seen, right? They make you feel unseen. They make you feel like you're this tiny little speck that a robot's going to help you with. For us, it's much more service. It's like, we're going to get to know you. We're going to be the equivalent of a doctor, right? In terms of your relationship over the course of your life, but we're focused on helping you build skills. And skills is, by the way, just the tip of the iceberg. Like for me, I want these to be self-improvement communities. I want these to be human aliveness communities, right? We could do cooking classes. We could do fitness classes. We could do all the non-technical skills that I mentioned, right? That we started with, we could pull those back in, which we're going to do. But you got to take it one step at a time.
This is eerie because, again, you've preempted my question. The next question was literally like, what domains does this translate to? I mean, the way that I see it, what you've got going so far is technical skills that are essentially job prep, right? Yeah. And they're in the context of self-improvement and, like you said, helping people figure out who they want to be and giving the freedom to, help them get there.
Yes.
But most of the time, who people want to be is not just what they want to do.
Right.
Who they want to be is this whole, I love Scott Barry Kaufman's metaphor of the sailboat of self-actualization. Like, it's got all these pieces, and what you're doing, like your job, that may just be the mast of the sailboat or the sail of the sailboat. Yep. You got to put all the rest together. So how do you see that model translate to those other domains?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's actually it's the funniest thing about this whole journey. So this journey for me has been over about roughly 3 years, 3.5. I mean, if you talk about the time as a nonprofit, a time as, whatever side project, it's been a side project. It was a side project for over 2 years, I think. It's only been about a year and a half since I quit my job. Is talk about lean into the questions and not be concerned about the answers, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like that's a core tenet of entrepreneurship. And investors never get that. They think you have to get it all figured out.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I mean, my best guess at this point is that the services will probably be kind of like an onion, right? In the sense where, and I go back to this onion. I know I said that once before. It's funny. But basically, there will be the most marketable in-demand skills we will be able to staff with live coaches, right? And probably the in-person ones. So those might be like the top 10, right? Something like that. So you can do Monday through Friday, Saturday, 3 sessions on Saturday, 3 sessions on Sunday. Beyond that, you might have another 20 that the next 20 most in-demand subjects. And we'll probably have online coaches that could serve anybody around the country or the world at any time. And then there'll be a huge long tail, right? Like on Coursera, I don't know how many courses there are, but there's a ton. But it's it's like this, right? So we will certainly welcome people who want to come and be a member of this community, and we do have people. By the way, we have several people who do stay just for the community and the enrichment from the live events, even without the coaches, because they don't have a coach for their specific area, and they'll still pay for it, which is pretty cool. So, I mean, my goal would be to expand those layers of onions, right? Like eventually, so it becomes like the Amazon of aliveness. I don't know, or
That's good.
But yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have some large program that helps people explore and figure out what they want to do and who they want to be. There's going to be a technical side to help them get the technical training, and there's going to be a non-technical side, right? So it's kind of like a up-reverted pyramid in some ways. So we're building those out. I think when you can pull those together, and then if you can ideally create, you can imagine these could become also little incubators. People could start companies, right? Which is in some ways a pinnacle of some of this stuff. There could be art, music. I mean, like, I don't think we're gonna get there, to be honest. I don't think we're gonna have like a giant art music thing. Maybe it's someday. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll have to make sure after this to make sure that you've got Shrikant's contact info, because I mean, essentially what we've been doing with the meetup the last couple of years, and he's the primary force behind that. I'm just the backup, is creating somewhat of an analogous community. I mean, it's not monetized, at least not in the same way, but a community centered around self-actualization, where the technical skills are that's not our focus. Our focus is essentially the rest of it, is making sure that ideas matter, right?
They do.
Ideas absolutely matter. That's how you live your life. And so it's important to make sure that you've got the right ideas. And I don't mean right as in factually correct. I mean right as in they're the most useful for you. They're tested against other ideas. They've been in the battle space of ideas, and you've actually had a chance to examine them.
Yeah.
And that's what our community is focused on. So I'll have to make sure that you guys link up, because I think that in terms of expanding your community, there's a lot of wisdom to share there.
So my hope is that the vision, right, is for every neighborhood to have a learning gym.
Yeah.
Right. I want to see this eventually. It's not going to be all us, or there'll be other competitors, I'm sure. I don't really care. Like, we're going to beat them in many ways. I mean, but it's not. What does it mean to be beat? That's and by the way, just to add what you just mentioned, right? That ideas matter. It's a weird subject for me a little bit. I totally agree with you, by the way, but there was somebody in my life who I respected a lot that vehemently argued the opposite, and that really hit me hard in the wrong way, I think. But it also spurred me to get better at execution in order to actually, and to be clear, I do believe ideas matter. And I think the idea that only execution matters is bullshit, right? I think you can change the world in many different ways. And I think it's harmful to argue otherwise. But anyway, that's just a small thing. Yeah. It's actually probably big.
What do you think has been the biggest shift in your perspective since, in this last 3-year journey? What's changed your mind? What was different than you expected?
I mean, I can tell you a few things. One, changing from a nonprofit to a for-profit. I mean, I think my whole attitude towards business capitalism in general has shifted significantly.
In what way?
I think when I started out, I didn't really want to have a part. Uh, I thought I should be able to articulate this better, but I think
It's okay. This is a space where you're absolutely allowed to think out loud. And
uh, yeah, I mean, I didn't believe in capitalism at the beginning in some capacity. I didn't think it was the right, like you talked about doing the right thing, right? Like I felt there were better other ways to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. I thought that I believed that profiting through a system in that kind of a way was exploitation, right? In a certain capacity. I no longer believe that. I think I changed for two reasons. One was the practical reason, which was trying to operate through the nonprofit system was a pain in the ass for me. It was my personality at that time, even at this time, I don't think is a good fit. Like I think I was changing at lightning speed, right? Our strategy, and like you had to, if you were going to do grants, you know, you had to put it in, you have to wait 6 months and 9 months. I had no way to do that, right? So there was a practical reason for that, and just the mindset of operating it in a traditional nonprofit versus a for-profit. And then the second one was philosophical again, which was more around, I just no longer buy those same arguments that I believed earlier. Again, around exploitation, around what is value, how is it perceived, um, and that and that I don't think that, you know, I think as long as you are creating and capturing value, like you can run a business in a way that's immoral, right? And you can run a business um, in a way that's not. So I don't think it's just the business itself. That being said, I do deeply believe in the need for broad systemic change. Like to me, the business is a this particular project, I would call it a project, is a way to for me to experiment really and to figure out sort of what works and how to build something better that we can create systemic change with. And systemic change can be done in multiple ways. Um, but you know, sorry, I lost my train of thought. You were systemic change and oh yeah, and then the capitalism thing. So yeah, I mean, I think now I think when we talk about loneliness, when we talk about isolation, I think these are second order effects, right, or first order effects, I suppose how you define it, of of systemic problems. I don't think these are like small things that you can fix with a new fad. And so that's a level deeper than what we're doing right now with this business that, you know, should this business succeed, will be succeeding within the system. So it's complicated, but
yeah, but you know, on some level, at least in my mind, that kind of systemic change is made up of individuals who affect their immediate community and then their broader community and so on, and inspire other individuals to start doing the same as nodes in a network. I mean, we talked a couple weeks ago with a woman, Rupali Sharma, who runs a Montessori school. And one of the questions that Alex was asking her was about why why Montessori isn't like the
yeah,
base from which people start with education and then go, okay, I'm going to take the Montessori model and then I'm going to change something and experiment. Instead, we've got this industrial model of education that you have to depart from.
yeah,
And, you know, why isn't Montessori the base? Well, there are whole lot of reasons for that. But at the end of the day, if a new model of education at that level is going to come into play, it's going to come into play because enough people have looked at other models of education that they can start to implement change on a small, then larger, then larger, then larger
yeah,
scale. And
yeah.
I think in your case, it seems like that's the path. I don't
It
know
is.
if that analysis resonates with you.
It is. It is. And I'll add, you know, my thoughts on. a lot of these things are continually evolving, right? Including with capitalism. I don't think it's set in stone for me. I think I'm constantly trying to better understand how things can work.
Awesome.
The I think it's a very interesting time as well. Some of you probably are more familiar with this than others. Those of you who are parents, there's been a large upswing in I don't know if upswings, a growth in discussion around basically one-room schoolhouses or micro schools or homeschooling, given COVID and given what's going to be happening this fall. I don't know if that, I haven't had my ear enough to the ground, even though I am very close, to know whether that's actually trickling down, so to speak, to, everyday people, right? Or
That's
whether
actually,
that's something that's kind of, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, that's actually what I'm doing day to day.
Okay.
My fiance and I have been, I don't want to get into too much detail, but we've been running or co-running like a little homeschool pod
Cool.
for 2 to 4 year olds.
Amazing. Yeah. And that will be very interesting. I actually know somebody, a founder who started a startup in the homeschooling space literally months before COVID hit. And so they just nailed it on the timing.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I forget what we were saying. Oh, I remember. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. Is this going to be a moment in time that's going to give public schools a run for their money, right? In some capacity, what's good about that, bad about that? So in some ways, can that create systemic change? Yes. In other ways, do you need real policy change? Yes. Right. It's interesting. So.
Yeah, for sure. So can you talk a little bit more about your response to COVID? Like how have you guys adapted in light of lockdown?
Yeah. So some of this I touched on earlier, but I think there's a bit more we can go into. A good chunk of our cost is the physical space. So, we run a month-to-month contract. We were working out of a co-working space, so we could cut that, which was good. Which actually means we could be profitable pretty darn soon, which is actually amazing. But yes, so we moved everything on. If you were to join us right now, let's say you wanted to learn user experience design or something like that, right? You join us, we have an onboarding process where we're going to walk you through all this and we're going to get to know you really deeply, really well, kind of what your needs are. We then give you a roadmap, which is, again, curated resources. So we don't create that. The other people spend millions of dollars creating that. We don't have to deal with it, which is amazing. So we curate the resources that are free and open. We add our own projects as necessary. And you're starting to make your way through this roadmap at your own pace. You check in every week on Monday with me or somebody else who's kind of a accountability person, your personal trainer. You're going to set goals for the week. You're going to reflect on the previous week. You're going to you can come out to it's kind of all you can eat membership. So you can actually join us for any of the programs that we're doing, coding, design, marketing, whatever. And you come out during the UX design session. And it's kind of like a mix of like office hours meets study group, right? So you have an expert professional there who's there to answer questions, but you've already done a lot of the studying on your own. Other times people will actually kind of just block off those 2 or 3 hours during the office hours and use it like a study group, right? So they'll actually just go through the curriculum while the coach is there and they'll ask questions and they get stuck. We do live events 2 to 3 times a week, as I mentioned, and then you can get assessments, feedback, connected to employers. Life is good. We're experimenting with a number of new models. So we're trying to do some rapid iteration and testing. I think there's some really interesting models like Weight Watchers that I'm looking closely at to see, what are the pieces of our product that give people the most value and what pieces are not necessary. We're looking at CrossFit, right? We're looking at, there's a bunch of interesting things out there that we're going to experiment with. We're also selling not just directly to individuals, but also to major online learning providers. So like some of the largest online college systems in the country. When we have physical spaces, the idea is that we can provide them with co-learning spaces for their students. We're rolling out a pilot with Coursera, right? Which is pretty awesome for us. And we got another huge number of people in the pipeline, which are good. But yeah, in terms of anything else that's changed, I think there's an open question in my mind as to, out of any 100 people, how many of those 100 really want and need and benefit from the physical community, right? And the physical space and community. How many benefit from live synchronous sort of learning and like what we're doing right now? And how many can just get by with what they do today, which is like a MOOC on Coursera, a massive open online course, which is, for those of you who don't know, probably you all know what Coursera is. I'm talking to a crowd that probably knows. So as you know, it's only a tiny chunk of people. You're talking less than 5% who succeed on a Coursera course. There's some unknown that would succeed in what we're doing now. I think what I've been realizing is that that number is actually probably a lot larger than I expected. And then there's some chunk of people that really want and need and benefit from the in-person. So that's the main change, I think, is those two distributions have gotten different.
Okay. Are there any other topics what's something that we haven't hit yet that you think is worth talking about?
I mean, it's probably related to my off topic, so I think we could probably jump into that. But let me think if there's anything else that's important.
In the meantime, Alex, as well, if you've got any questions, it's your time to jump into.
Ray's been beating me to him too, so.
It's eerie, right? Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, I say let's jump into the off topic. So for anybody who's new to the Switch and may not have heard this before, the off topic is a chance we give our guests to take a break from things they may be tired of talking about over and over and over, and bring up some topic, as long as it's not directly related to the main topic. It can be anything serious or lighthearted, philosophy, doesn't have to be, could be a book recommendation, something someone said to you in line at the grocery store, really anything. And we'll spend a couple of minutes on it. And then for the audience, we will go into Q&A. So go ahead and either stick your questions in the chat, or like Joseph just did, put a little exclamation point, and we will get to you guys. So Ray, off topic, what do you have for us?
So I've got two things. One which is more lighthearted, one's a little bit more serious. The lighthearted one will be something that happened this morning, which was I slept in because I had a late night, and I woke up and started getting ready, I don't know, 10 or 11. I usually work from about 10 to 10 roughly. So I'm but I'm kind of take some breaks between them because we have classes in the evening. Our classes are in the evening. But anyway, I actually tweeted about this today. But I put on some music and I was listening to Vampire Weekend. Some of you might know Vampire Weekend, the band, some of you may not. But anyway, it was just such a good jam. And I was just like, I didn't have a shirt on. I was just like, it was just me in the house, started dancing by myself.
Like
and I was like,
a movie.
I was like, this, to me at that exact moment in time, I woke up to a very nasty message on a text that basically had me in a bad mood. And it just made me think that like, at that moment in time, I was like, dancing like this is more effective for me than meditation. I was just like, I didn't really touch on this. Maybe we should have touched on it potentially, but I have had my own journey with meditation in many different types and forms. But anyway, yeah. So at that moment in time for me, it was like just like purely dancing and joy, and like the endorphins from that was like, wow, this just got my day on an amazing start, more than I have 98% of the time felt with meditation. So that was just something to think about.
Nice. Let's take that for a second. Oh, were you about to go into more of that, or the?
No, that's fine. I was going to go the other one.
I want to take that one because the fact that you mentioned meditation, Alex and I could feel both of our ears perked up. That's a common topic for us. There's a whole meditation day in the 52 Living Ideas meetup. So what has your experience been with meditation? And well, yeah, let's just start with that, and we'll do it quick. And I want Alex to chime in as well.
Sure, and I need to obviously caveat that meditation as a single term is obviously way more nuanced than just one word. But I guess my journey or my experience with it, I have tried, I don't know, probably a large handful of different types and methods of meditation over the years. I think I probably have had three significant periods of my life when I kind of tried more significantly. One was sort of early college, and then post-nup late college, and then in and post San Francisco into Detroit. For me, the method that I used that resonated most deeply with me and sort of helped me the most was a form of Sahaj Mark meditation, which is, it was basically rebranded, as far as I understand, as heartfulness. I don't know if there's any familiarity there, but as opposed to mindfulness. And I think I'm not an expert by any means, but to me, it was a tool. It was more of a means to an end, I think, rather than an end of itself. More, I don't know if I would say that actually. It had different effects for me at different times, but essentially, I had. I think I started doing meditation in part because I was trying to fight what I believe is sort of a natural personality trait for myself, which is what many people might call like a jumpy mind sort of thing, kind of always leaping from one thing to the next. And I think today there are certainly specific instances where it overcomes me, and that kind of takes control in some capacity. But I think I've accepted it much more, and I've moderated it much more, to the point where as long as I can really keep what I believe is the big picture in mind for myself and in heart and emotion, and sort of bring my energy from up here down to more here, or like my focus, I feel good and can continue to do what I want to do and to be who I want to be. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is the heartfulness piece, in some cases, I think I stopped it really when I started therapy last fall. And I think for me, and I started therapy because I was broke for like 2 years, and I literally couldn't do it before that, which is kind of a shame. But I only started after I got investment, after literally years of nothing. But anyway, so since I did that, that sort of replaced it for me. And then I don't know. I want to have it somewhere in my mind, as long as I feel in moderation, as long as I feel in a good place. I don't feel a need right now to do it. Whereas a year ago, I would have said it was a regular practice that I need. Yeah. So things change.
Yeah, sure.
And I was doing there were times when I was doing 90 minutes a day type of thing. And now I know minutes isn't everything, but I was serious about it. Is kind of what I mean to say.
Yeah, I definitely also go through periods of that I feel like I kind of need to clear the junk out, just let my mind process it and get it out. And there's other times I feel like where therapy is a more needed thing, because I need more of a reflecting board, that just sitting and really, my mind doesn't have all of the necessary ingredients itself to process it all. And that's when I think therapy and other stuff comes in for me personally. And then other times I feel like my mind's doing okay, but my body's energy. And then it's like you said, dancing, or, not for me, like exercise in some way. But meditation for me was the thing that allowed me to realize that there were all these different kind of needs I had. And that just one thing, like, why isn't exercise fixing everything? It's, there's other stuff I got to take care of, like in the game The Sims, filling all those little meters, keeping those up, and it's not always the same thing. So I that resonates.
Agreed.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, for me, meditation, I mean, I've told the story on the podcast probably twice, maybe 3 times, of how I started meditating and some of the benefits for me. So just to keep it short, I mean, I find meditation to be just another component in the self-actualization, transcendence sailboat that is now my favorite metaphor that I keep coming back to. It's like, it's just another piece that keeps the sailboat operating properly. And there are times when it seems like you don't need that piece. And in my mind, the way that I maintain my sailboat, I'm going to keep it operational just so that, when that perfect storm comes along, I know how to use it. I know that it's in my arsenal. I know that the skills that it provides to me, and that component is in good working order, even when the more instrumental, uh, immediate use is not necessary at the time.
Yeah.
That's just how I run my ship.
Nice.
I freaking love that metaphor. Cool. So I'm just for curiosity's sake, we won't spend as much time on it, but I'm curious what your other off topic was before we move to questions.
Sure. So the other off topic is slightly off topic, but it's related, which is, remember how I talked about sort of macro micro problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we're trying to solve. And I believe that many trends, I don't know if trends is the right word, but yeah, I guess it is. Many trends and events that we see and that we've seen over the last, I don't know, 5-10 years, do actually at its core reflect this sort of, I guess, loss of meaning or purpose, or sort of, or I think people kind of grasping in many ways right now. Not just me, not just sort of really intellectually or sort of abstractly, but specifically, when we talk about what seemed like crazy events for most people, of Andrew Yang, of Trump, of Justin Bieber and Kanye saying that they're going to no longer do popular music, that they're only going to do secular music, or sorry, basically only religious music, right? For certain times, opioid crisis, right? Loneliness, like all these things, mental health crises, they're all related in my view. And I actually had one of my random facts is Andrew Yang actually came to a bar in Detroit about 2 years ago, and that's where I met him.
Nice.
And so I had like a 30-minute conversation with him at a bar in Detroit. And at the very end, he's like, "Oh yeah, and I'm running for president." And he's like, "I just quit my job running for president." And this was like 2-3 years ago. And I was like, "Of what? Like, president of what?" He literally like pulled out a business card that he had just scratched off his old thing. It was so funny. But anyway, I think we, yeah. And so, when I see, in some cases, startups or other sort of Band-Aid fixes in many ways, right? Trying to kind of go after a mental health crisis or opioids or whatever. It's like trying to stop a gaping wound with a Band-Aid, right? It's like, and in many ways, this is kind of the challenge with like philanthropy and capitalism, right? Like there's certain, I don't know. I mean, these are ongoing thoughts that I'm sort of spurting out, right? That I don't have completely fleshed out, but I deeply do believe that one of the core challenges of the next how many years and now is going to be, how do we strengthen the fabric of community? How do we strengthen the fabric of relationships now? And how do we do that in a systemic way? I think what I'm doing right now arguably could be systemic at some point, but it's not. I think it's more of a proof of concept in some ways that will become huge. Don't get me wrong. Like, I want there to be thousands of these things. So it's kind of a random thought, but I think we're just seeing a lot of people. We're seeing the expression of, I think, of a lot of the same type of things that I was experiencing myself.
Yeah. I think, just to end on a positive note, I think that the place that leaves us is opportunity. There's opportunity to fill those gaps with amazing, incredible things, and people who have ideas can execute on them, and they'll help solve this crisis of meaning. And in my mind, that's awesome. But I'm an optimist, I guess.
I am too, I suppose.
So let's go ahead and get to some audience questions for the end here. So again, for the audience, if you've got questions, go ahead and stick them in the chat. We will come to you. A couple of rules to keep in mind, as always. First of all, please be brief, stay on topic, and be courteous. courtesy means feel free to disagree with things, but understand that this is not a place to hurl insults. And then lastly, we won't do any back and forth. So once you ask your question, we'll go ahead and mute you, and that'll be that. And so we will start with Tanya or Tanya. Go ahead and ask your question. Actually, I'm not sure that Tanya is still here. Yep. Okay. So next will be Joseph Bullock.
Hi, thank you for joining us this evening. It's really been awesome. It's been fantastic, actually, just listen to you. And like, there's so many ideas that are going through my head, the possibilities of this. You mentioned you had 7 or 8 value propositions, which actually allows you to pivot pretty easily. One, what are your top 2? And have you thought about maybe targeting specific problems with community, meaning like whether it be a prison system or whether it be jobs that are being automated, because those are natural communities because they have shared experiences. So that that's a way of kind of creating a natural way of community of learning that people are already in the same community.
Yeah, excellent. And good to meet you, and thanks for that. So for the first part of your question, again, out of those 7 or 8, what are the top 2? One would be the mentorship and the coaches, right? That are there. And then let's see. So what did I say? Sort of physical space, peer community, coaching, live events, personal trainer, feedback and assessments, and employer connections. So yeah, I'd say the coaching piece of it, and then probably the I mean, I think the peer community in one way or another, right? That means like that could be small groups of 6 to 10, on online or something else. I think that plus the ability to get unstuck, right? So those are 2. Actually, take that back. I would say also the learning roadmaps. You need to have a clear pathway to get to where you want to go. So I think it's that plus the coaching, I would argue. And then your second question was around sorry, I lost
target. No, basically
targeting.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So short answer to your question is, I certainly think that would work. I think that's probably even a better strategy. I think if I do we do that now? No, I think that ship has sailed. If we're going to stay with the ship metaphors, I think we're a little bit too past that at this point. I'm not going to like revert back and go just to one specific community. Though if I were recommending somebody to start this themselves, yes, I would say start with one specific community and start with one thing. We didn't start with one specific community per se, but we did start with one specific skill, which was web development. And then, yeah.
Right. Does that target a problem, though? I mean, I don't mean to ask.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
Does it target a problem? Yeah, clarify.
So basically, if it's targeting a problem,
yeah,
like it would naturally be like something like web development for a community that is being automated out of a job. Like, so, that's where.
Yeah, we don't do that. So.
Cool. All right. Next up is Sanjay.
Yeah. Hi. I think this is fantastic what you're doing. I mean, you're really helping underprivileged communities, and they're oftentimes left out of the educational market. They don't see a way that they can improve their lives. So this is really good. The question I have is I mean, and it relates to what Joe just asked, that I actually had kind of narrowed down your value propositions to 2. And interestingly enough, I came up with, you gave us 3, and I came up with 2 of those 3. I also included your mentoring coaches as the top value that you are offering. And I consider the peer community. So basically, in my mind, the core of your service is, I mean, the simple way to explain it, because you're using a gym type of model, is you're providing a personal trainer for learning, for job-based or personal-based skills. And another way to say it is you're providing a type of emotional hand-holding.
Yeah.
and mentoring, which is very important. So the question really is, how can you scale this across? I imagine you're planning to go beyond just the local area or Michigan state. So how do you plan to scale this?
Near peer mentorship, right? So basically the goal here, the idea is to require essentially when people start, when they finish, they become the TAs, right? So you can kind of split this up into multiple. You can have like senior people experts, right, that are available for office hours at periodic times. You can have like sort of mid-range sort of folks who have maybe 3-5 years experience, what have you, who are professionals that are leading discussion sessions from time to time, but then sort of the typical the part you need to scale is like the one-on-one mentorship, right? Which is obviously a tricky thing to do, but that what we found is like 98% of the time, you don't need somebody who's got 3, 5, 10 years experience. You need somebody who's literally done it just before you have. And so that can cover most of the things. And then you bring your more senior questions to the discussion sections, or if you need to, you can escalate it up the ladder, which is honestly not that much different than a standard college model of TAs and professors, right? I think it's just taking it arguably one step further and arguably streamlining that process to get rid of the bureaucracy to be able to make it such that many, many students can become effectively TAs for others.
Thanks, Sanjay. Next up is Zeno.
Hi. Yeah, I have a question about community and education. And when we move college education to online, there's something called the college experience, which may have a bad rap because it's associated with partying, etc. But there's also a core element of living in a dorm, interacting with students of different backgrounds, different career goals, different interests. And that's a value in college education. So how can we make that a value proposition in online education, where you not have just community around, like somebody wants to learn coding, but somebody wants to learn how to think, how to be a citizen, how to engage romantically with other people. So have you thought about this? Like, how can you do community online in education that is not just focused on a professional focus or learning a certain subject matter, but is part of what we expect in education to happen when you're there for 4 or 5 years. You grow in various ways, and it's supported by all kinds of interaction on campus.
Yeah, great question as well. Good to meet you. So I am absolutely a huge fan of, or I'm on the same wavelength, I believe, as you in terms of the value of everything you just described. I would argue my NELP experience that I talked about earlier in this conversation was probably more than half the value I got right from my entire college education, and that was 6 weeks. I mean, it's challenging. I think this is all like one step at a time. The end goal for me, at least with this, is I want to build an entirely new university system, right? Like this is a stepping stone. Like learning gyms are sort of one piece of this. And then eventually I want to build an entire higher education or higher education system. I think we're starting off with the quote unquote easiest things to do, which is these technical skills, right? That for many individuals only require one question in the evening. In an entire evening of study, they might have one question for the instructor. The rest of it they can kind of do on their own, which is what we're seeing. Actually, it's very limited, but they want the security of having a coach there to be able to, that they can help if they need to. Obviously, that is not the case for many critical skills as human beings, whether that's around thinking critically or well, I don't know how to answer this exactly. I think some of what you described, I believe, can be developed through what we're doing now, right? So critical thinking can be developed in many cases by by project-based learning, right? When you add projects to the courses that we're doing, and you're making students go out into their community and have these, and they have to go back to their mentor. The one-on-one mentorship that we do is the main opportunity that we allow for more Socratic-like discussions, right? And sort of and learning along that line. That's what we actually tell our mentors. We instruct them how to the basics of sort of this type of methodology. Down the road, I would like to add, I would like to make these, as we talked about, communities to help people be alive, to be fully human, as almost a competitor to the School of Life, right? I mean, as many of you might be familiar with the School of Life type of thing, that could teach these others. But you can tell I'm beating around the bush. I don't actually know the answer to what you're saying. I think we'll have to find out as we go. I think some of the questions may not be as scalable, quote unquote, or some of them may not be as, they might not have the same cost advantages that we can do in other areas. But that doesn't mean we can't offer them, right? I would say the other piece, well, no. Yeah, it's kind of an incomplete answer, and I apologize, but I think it's to be determined.
All right, and thanks for the question, Zeno. All right, so that wraps up our Q&A. Unless anyone wants to get a last-minute question in, go ahead and stick it in the chat while I say this part. Ray, if people are interested in following up with you, following up more with Shift Up, or you mentioned Twitter. I don't know if you want to give that out. Any place that you want people to connect with you, go ahead and pitch all of it. Any links you mentioned, I'll stick in the show notes for the podcast side of things. But where can people find you?
Sure. So I'm just putting in chat right now. The main website is www.shiftup.tech. That's shiftup.tech. My email is just ray@shiftup.tech. And my Twitter handle is, we didn't talk about this. I should have talked about this, is at Reese's and Coke. Reese's like Reese's peanut butter cups, and Coke like Coca-Cola. Some of my two favorite things. And yeah, so I think there's that. You got my email, you got the website. If you are interested in coaching or mentoring, if you have a technical skill in these areas, right? Any of these digital skills, web development, game development, digital marketing, user experience design, or if you or any friends or family or networks that you have may be interested, we have training programs for these. They range right now from about $75 a month to $150 a month. They're on sale. Or just want to follow up and just send me some questions. Happy to respond to the best of my ability. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ray, for coming on The Switch. It was an awesome conversation. Glad to have had you.
This was great. I appreciate you all, and good questions. And thank you, Chase. Thank you, Alex, and everyone else.
Thank you.